A broken cowboy hid from the world. Until an Apache woman arrived on a dying horse, the sun had just started to dip behind the jagged mountains when Cole Matthews stepped out of his small cabin, his worn boots crunching against the dry dirt. The wind carried a faint smell of sagebrush, dusty and sharp, but it was the only scent that reminded him he was still alive. He squinted toward the horizon, the sky painted in streaks of orange and pink, but even the beauty of the sunset could not lighten the weight he carried inside. Cole had long ago stopped counting the years he had spent alone in this part of the world. He preferred it that way. People with their questions, their pity, their judgment, were things he had learned to avoid. The cabin had been his sanctuary for almost a decade. Nestled on the edge of the plains, surrounded by sparse grasslands and the occasional cluster of mesquite trees, it was a place where no one could reach him unless he allowed it. The walls were simple wooden planks that had weathered many storms, and inside the air smelled faintly of leather, wood smoke, and dust. A fire always burned in the stone hearth, not just for warmth but because it reminded him of life's simple continuities. Life out here was predictable. It had to be. One wrong decision could cost him his horse, his food, or worse. Out here, mistakes were punished by hunger, by exposure, or by silence. Cole had not always lived in solitude. There was a time when laughter filled the cabins and the corral, when neighbors waved as they rode past, and when he had trusted people with his secrets and his heart. But that was a long time ago, and the memories now hurt more than they comforted. A bad accident on a cattle drive had left him questioning everything he had worked for. A friend had been lost, and Cole blamed himself. Ever since, he had hidden from the world, burying his regrets deeper than the roots of the mesquite trees that dotted the land around him. The desert, he found, was a loyal companion. It did not ask questions, it did not demand explanations, and it did not remind him of failure. Every morning he rose before dawn to tend to his cattle. The work was hard but honest. He would check the fences for holes, repair a broken post, or guide a stray calf back to the herd. His hands, rough and calloused, moved with the rhythm of years of labor, each motion a reminder that he was still capable, still alive, still able to survive. And yet, even in these small victories, a quiet emptiness lingered. He spoke aloud sometimes, mostly to himself, reading the wind like he read the pages of a book, hoping for some sign that life might reach out to him again. The mornings were always the hardest. The world seemed too bright, too alive, too full of stories he no longer felt a part of. He would ride his horse, Dusty, across the plains, letting the wind whip against his face. The horse was old, gray-speckled, and steady, a companion as silent as the land itself. Dusty never asked questions, never demanded attention more than a scratch or a kind word. The bond they shared was unspoken but strong, built on years of patience and shared survival. Together they wandered through dry creek beds and over rocky ridges, shadows stretching long in the early light. Cole would often pause, watching the horizon as if expecting something, anything, to break the monotony of his lonely existence. Evenings were quieter still. Cole would sit by the fire, a tin cup of coffee warming his hands, the smoke curling up into the fading sky. He sometimes picked up an old journal, its pages filled with his sketches of the land, notes on animal tracks, and brief entries about the cattle and the weather. But the deeper thoughts, the ones about loss, regret, and fear, rarely made it to the pages. They stayed in his chest, heavy and unrelenting. Some nights, the loneliness felt like a tangible weight pressing down on his shoulders, and he would stare into the flames, hoping the fire could burn away the memories that tormented him. Cole had tried to reach the nearby town a few times over the years, mostly for supplies or news, but he never stayed long. The people there reminded him too much of what he had lost: friendship, trust, family. Their curiosity about his past, their well-meaning questions, and their friendly smiles only deepened the ache inside him. He had learned that it was easier to disappear than to explain himself, easier to turn his back on a world that had once let him down. So he stayed on the outskirts, watching the smoke of distant chimneys rise into the sky, listening to the faint hum of life from afar, and telling himself he was safer here, away from the complications and dangers of human connection. Yet even in his solitude, Cole felt the faint stirrings of something he could not name. Sometimes, the wind would carry voices that weren't there, or he would hear the distant echo of a laugh and feel a pang in his chest. He could not tell whether it was longing or guilt, or simply the remnants of a life he had abandoned. The desert had taught him to expect the unexpected, and deep down, he sensed that his quiet existence might not remain undisturbed forever. But he ignored that feeling, telling himself that the only way to survive was to remain hidden, unseen, untouched. One afternoon, as Cole repaired a broken fence post near the edge of a small ravine, he paused and looked out over the land. The sun glinted off something in the distance. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, a mirage conjured by the heat of the day. But then he saw movement, slow, deliberate, and exhausted. A figure appeared, trudging through the dusty plain, accompanied by a horse that limped heavily with each step. Cole felt a twinge of curiosity, quickly buried under layers of caution. Who could possibly be out here, so far from any road, any town, any help? He shook his head, returning to his work, telling himself to mind his own business. But the image lingered in his mind as he worked. As the sun sank lower, painting the sky in deep reds and purples, he glanced again. The figure was still moving, staggering slightly, the horse clearly struggling to stay upright. Cole felt a strange tug in his chest, a mixture of fear, caution, and something he hadn't felt in years, concern. Against his better judgment, he decided to ride closer, to see if the traveler needed help, or if it was someone he should simply leave to their own devices. The desert had taught him many lessons, and one of them was this. Sometimes survival depended not only on self-preservation, but on recognizing moments when others needed aid. As he approached, Cole noticed the figure more clearly. It was a woman, her clothes torn and dusty, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. Her horse, equally exhausted, stumbled as it tried to keep pace. Cole's instincts screamed at him to turn back, to retreat to the safety of his cabin. Yet another part of him, the part buried under years of solitude and pain, recognized something familiar in her struggle. She was fighting to survive, just as he had fought to endure the desert. And without fully understanding why, Cole felt the first spark of a connection he had long denied himself. By the time he reached her, the woman had collapsed near the edge of a small creek bed, her horse nearly on its knees. Cole dismounted, feeling the weight of the moment press upon him. He knew that whatever choice he made next could change the rhythm of his quiet, isolated life forever. And yet, as he extended a hand toward the stranger, the wind whispered across the plains, carrying a sense of inevitability. This encounter, unplanned and impossible as it seemed, might be the very thing that would break the walls he had spent years building. Cole didn't speak much as he helped the woman and her horse toward his cabin. Words felt unnecessary. The desert had taught him to communicate in actions, in patience, in understanding without needing to explain. He guided them carefully, supporting her weak frame and steadying the horse with gentle but firm hands. He felt the tension in his own body ease slightly as they moved, the rhythm of the land and the act of helping another living being reminding him of life beyond regret and fear. As they reached the cabin, Cole felt a strange mixture of anticipation and trepidation. He had lived for years in solitude, convinced that hiding from the world was the only way to survive. Yet now, with this exhausted stranger before him, he could not help but wonder. Had fate, the desert, or some unseen force brought her to him for a reason? He had no answers, only questions, and a faint, stubborn hope that perhaps, just perhaps, His quiet life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. And so, as the night fell and the stars began to emerge one by one in the endless sky, Cole tended a fire, offered water, and prepared a place for the woman and her horse. In the silence of the desert, a fragile connection had begun, a quiet spark that promised the possibility of something more, something beyond regret, something that might remind a broken cowboy that even in the loneliest corners of the world, life had a way of reaching out. The night had fallen completely, and the desert was alive with quiet sounds, the whisper of the wind over the dry grass, the distant cry of a coyote, and the gentle rustling of leaves in the mesquite trees. Inside the small cabin, Cole Matthews moved quietly, careful not to startle the stranger who had stumbled into his life earlier that evening. The fire flickered softly in the hearth, casting shadows that danced along the walls, and the smell of burning wood mixed with the faint aroma of the coffee Cole had made. He had poured her a cup of warm water, knowing it would soothe her parched throat, and now he watched her carefully as she rested on the floor. She was a mystery to him in every way. Her clothes were worn and torn, and the long dark hair falling in tangled strands around her face suggested a long and difficult journey. Cole didn't know her name yet, nor where she came from, but there was a strength in her posture even in exhaustion, a quiet determination that hinted she had survived much more than her current weakness suggested. Her eyes, dark and alert, followed his movements with careful curiosity, a mixture of caution and quiet hope. Cole had seen many travelers pass through the plains, but there was something different about her. She seemed as if she belonged to the land itself, shaped by it, yet separate from it. Cole stepped closer, offering a hand. "You're safe here," he said, his voice low and rough from years of disuse. The woman looked up at him, her lips parting slightly as if to speak, but she only shook her head. Cole realized she understood very little English. That didn't matter. He had learned long ago that words were not always necessary. Actions, patience, and observation often said more than language ever could. He gestured toward the floor, indicating she should rest, and then turned to the horse outside, gently guiding it into the small corral he had built behind the cabin. Dusty, his own horse, neighed softly, recognizing a kindred spirit in the struggling animal. The Apache woman, who would soon tell him her name was Ahioka, stayed low on the cabin floor, her breathing shallow but steadying. Cole moved around the cabin, gathering blankets and a small basin of water. He set the basin beside her and tore off a piece of cloth to dampen her forehead. Ahioka flinched at the touch at first, but then relaxed slightly, leaning into the cool cloth. She nodded faintly, a gesture of thanks he understood perfectly. Cole worked quietly through the night, checking the horses, tending the fire and listening to her soft, steady breathing. He found himself studying her, noticing the small details. The dirt smudges on her skin, the way her fingers moved as if holding onto some invisible support, the way her eyes, even in exhaustion, never fully closed. He thought about the journey she must have made, the dangers she must have faced, and a sense of respect grew quietly inside him. She had survived this far in the harsh desert, alone, and that spoke more about her character than any words could. As the night deepened, the wind howled through the canyons, rattling the cabin walls. Cole sat near the fire, his mind turning over memories he had tried to bury. He remembered a time when he had laughed freely, when friends and family had been part of his life, and how quickly those days had been taken from him. Seeing Ahioka, he realized how much he had missed human connection, even though he had spent years convincing himself that solitude was safer. Now, faced with another living being who needed him, he felt a strange, unfamiliar stir of purpose. Perhaps this was what he had been waiting for, though he hadn't known it. Morning came slowly, painting the sky with shades of gold and violet. The desert seemed alive in the first light, the silence broken by the distant calls of birds and the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Cole had prepared a simple breakfast, bread, dried meat, and water, for both himself and Ahioka. She remained seated on the floor, leaning against the cabin wall, and watched him with quiet interest. Cole offered her the food, placing it gently before her, and she took it without hesitation, eating slowly but steadily. Her movements were careful, almost ritualistic, as if every action mattered. Cole understood that this was a woman who had learned to survive, to measure every step, and to adapt. After breakfast, he helped her to her feet, supporting her as she walked toward the door. The horses waited patiently outside, and Cole led Ahioka to the stronger of the two, showing her how to approach it safely. The horse sniffed her hand, then nuzzled gently, accepting her presence. Ahioka smiled faintly, a small, genuine smile that reached her eyes, and for a moment, Cole felt a warmth he had not known in years. She did not speak much, but her gratitude was clear, and that was enough. Words were not needed to build trust here. Actions and patience were far more powerful. Over the next few days, Cole and Ahioka settled into a rhythm. He showed her how to gather water from a nearby stream, how to maintain the horses, and how to tend to basic needs in the harsh desert environment. In return, Ahioka shared small glimpses of her skills, tracking, survival techniques, and knowledge of the land that impressed Cole. She could read the tracks of animals, sense changes in the weather, and move through the desert with a quiet grace that spoke of years of living close to nature. Cole, who had spent years alone, found himself learning from her just as much as she was learning from him. Evenings became a time of quiet reflection. They would sit near the fire, sharing gestures, sketches, and simple words, building a fragile bridge between their languages and cultures. Cole learned her name properly, Ahioka, and discovered that it meant she brings happiness in her language. The irony was not lost on him. A woman he had never met, from a culture he barely understood, was slowly bringing light into the darkness he had embraced for so long. He realized that perhaps life still had surprises to offer, even to a man who had convinced himself that hope had long abandoned him. As the days passed, the bond between them grew stronger, not through grand gestures or speeches, but through quiet acts of care. Cole repaired Ahioka's torn clothing, tending to small cuts and scrapes. She, in turn, taught him a few words in her language and shared stories of the land she had traveled through, the rivers she had crossed, and the mountains she had climbed. Cole listened, captivated by her courage and resilience. He felt a growing respect for her, but also a sense of vulnerability he had long avoided. Trust was a dangerous thing, but he realized that it could also be a form of healing. One afternoon, while they worked to mend a fence, Cole noticed the way Ahioka moved with careful precision. She carried herself with quiet strength, and even her exhaustion did not diminish her focus. He watched her as she tied a knot in the rope, adjusted a post, and brushed dust from her hands. In those moments, he felt something he had not felt in years: connection, admiration, and perhaps the first flicker of friendship. It was fragile, delicate, and easily broken, but it was real. He found himself speaking more than he had in years, asking her questions about her past, her journey, and her family. Ahioka answered in short, deliberate words, her voice soft but firm, and Cole realized that communication could take many forms beyond speech. By the end of the week, Ahioka's horse had regained some strength, standing taller and moving with more confidence. Cole noticed the change, feeling a quiet satisfaction in his chest. It was a small victory, but victories were precious in this land, where survival was never guaranteed. Ahioka, too, seemed to sense the progress, and a small spark of pride shone in her eyes. For the first time, Cole allowed himself to imagine a future where he was not entirely alone, where human connection and shared purpose could exist alongside the harsh realities of the desert. Yet, even in these peaceful days, the world beyond the plains loomed in the back of Cole's mind. He knew that isolation could not last forever, that dangers, challenges, and past mistakes could always resurface. He had spent so many years hiding, but now, with Ahioka by his side, he wondered whether he was ready to face what might come. The thought was both frightening and exhilarating. He felt a cautious hope growing inside him, a reminder that life, no matter how harsh or unpredictable, had a way of surprising even the most broken of men. And so, as the sun set on another day, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and violet, Cole and Ahioka sat near the fire, watching the shadows stretch long across the plains. Dusty and Ahioka's horse rested nearby, their steady breathing blending with the crackle of the flames. There was no need for words. In the quiet of the desert, a fragile trust had formed, a connection born of shared struggle, mutual respect, and unspoken understanding. For Cole Matthews, the broken cowboy who had hidden from the world for so long, this was the beginning of something new, a slow, cautious step toward healing, companionship, and the possibility that life could once again bring unexpected light into even the darkest corners. Days turned into weeks, and life on the plains settled into a steady rhythm. Cole Matthews and Ahioka moved through the days with quiet purpose, each learning from the other, each finding a little more comfort in the presence of the other. The desert, which had once felt empty and harsh to Cole, now seemed alive with subtle signs of life, a place where small victories mattered and small gestures carried meaning. Every sunrise brought a sense of hope, fragile but persistent, that perhaps the world outside his cabin could hold something more than pain and solitude. Cole had started to notice changes in himself. The stiffness in his shoulders eased when he worked alongside Ahioka, repairing fences, tending to the cattle, or guiding the horses across the plains. Her presence, though quiet and often wordless, had a way of grounding him. He found himself speaking more than he had in years, not just giving orders to Dusty or muttering to himself, but talking to her, sharing small observations about the land, the sky, and the world beyond the horizon. He learned to wait patiently as she responded in broken English or gestures, and in that waiting he discovered something he hadn't felt in a long time: trust. Ahioka, too, seemed to change. Her initial weariness softened, replaced by a cautious strength. She moved with purpose, tending to her horse, helping Cole with chores, and even exploring the surrounding plains with him. Though her words were few, her actions spoke volumes. She knew the desert as if it were part of her body, how to find water hidden beneath the rocks, how to track small animals, and how to sense the subtle shift in the wind that hinted at a coming storm. Cole watched her in admiration, silently realizing that the woman who had arrived on a dying horse was stronger than he had ever imagined. She had endured hardships he could barely comprehend, and yet here she was, alive, determined, and unbroken. One morning, after a long night of wind and dust, Cole awoke to find Ahioka already outside, guiding the horses to a small stream that trickled through the dry landscape. She turned when she saw him and smiled faintly, nodding toward the water. Cole followed her, leading Dusty and the other horse, and together they filled their containers with fresh water. The air was crisp and clean, and for a moment the desert seemed less barren, less hostile, more like a living, breathing partner in their daily struggle. They worked together without speaking much, a quiet understanding developing between them, as if the land itself had taught them a new language, one of patience, respect, and cooperation. As the days passed, Cole began to share fragments of his past, though cautiously, as if afraid that speaking too much would shatter the fragile bond they were building. He told Ahioka of the accident that had changed his life, the cattle drive gone wrong, the friend he had lost, and the guilt that had driven him into isolation. He expected little reaction, knowing she might not understand the details, but he was surprised when she simply nodded, her eyes calm and attentive, acknowledging the weight of his story without judgment. In return, Ahioka shared small pieces of her own journey, the dangers she had faced, the family she was searching for, and the trials that had shaped her resilience. Her words were brief but filled with honesty, and in that honesty, Cole felt a connection he had not thought possible. Together, they began to explore the plains beyond the cabin, moving cautiously but with growing confidence. Cole taught Ahioka how to navigate by the stars at night, how to read the tracks of animals, and how to anticipate the weather in ways that only years of living in the desert could teach. She, in turn, showed him subtle techniques for moving silently, observing the land and understanding the rhythms of nature. They shared stories beside the fire, sometimes through gestures or drawings in the dirt, sometimes with broken words that grew more understandable over time. In these moments, the walls Cole had built around himself began to crumble, replaced by a tentative hope that human connection could exist without danger or betrayal. One afternoon, while repairing a section of fence near a rocky outcrop, Ahioka paused and pointed to a distant ridge. She motioned for Cole to follow her, leading him to a place where the wind had carved a shallow canyon. There she showed him tracks, small footprints, fresh and deliberate, likely made by travelers who had passed through the area recently. Cole studied the tracks, impressed by her keen observation, and together they followed them for a short distance, learning to read the story the land told. The exercise became a game of sorts, a way to share knowledge, test their skills, and deepen their understanding of each other's strengths. In the process, they discovered a rhythm of companionship, where trust and respect formed naturally through shared labor and experience. Evenings became a sacred time for reflection. They would sit by the fire, the stars stretching endlessly above, and share moments of silence that were as meaningful as words. Cole sometimes reached for his journal, sketching the land, noting the behavior of the horses, or recording his thoughts about the days they had shared. Ahioka would watch him, occasionally tracing patterns in the dirt or pointing to shapes in the stars that reminded her of stories from her people. In these quiet hours, the cabin felt less like a place of isolation and more like a home, filled with small acts of care, understanding, and unspoken companionship. The bond between them deepened not through grand declarations, but through small, consistent acts of trust. Cole showed Ahioka how to safely tend to the horses' hooves, how to gather firewood without disturbing the delicate desert plants, and how to maintain the cabin against the harsh elements. Ahioka, in turn, demonstrated her ability to track, forage, and survive in ways Cole had never thought to explore. Each lesson became a shared experience, a bridge between their worlds, and a reminder that life could be richer when shared with another person who understood both struggle and perseverance. One evening, a storm approached, dark clouds rolling in from the west. Cole and Ahioka worked quickly to secure the cabin and protect the horses. Rain began to fall, first in light drops, then in a steady, drenching torrent. The wind howled through the plains, and the fire inside the cabin flickered dangerously. Cole glanced at Ahioka, who was crouched beside him, securing the last of the ropes around the corral. They exchanged a look, one of mutual understanding and silent communication. They had faced challenges together before, and this was no different. Together they weathered the storm, each finding reassurance in the other's presence, each realizing that survival was easier when shared. After the storm passed, the air smelled fresh, clean, and alive. The ground glistened with moisture, and the horses shook off the rain, stamping their hooves in relief. Cole and Ahioka stood side by side, surveying the landscape, and for a moment the desert seemed less like a place of punishment and more like a place of possibility. Cole felt a quiet satisfaction, a recognition that the bond they were forming could withstand the harshest elements. It was in these moments that he began to understand the deeper meaning of companionship, not just as a comfort, but as a source of strength, resilience, and hope. One morning, while tending to the horses, Cole noticed Ahioka studying a patch of wildflowers near the creek. She knelt down, examining them carefully, and then handed one to him, pointing to it with a small, shy smile. Cole took it, understanding the gesture as a sign of connection, of acknowledgement, of shared appreciation for the small beauty in their harsh world. They laughed quietly, a sound that felt foreign yet welcome in the cabin, and Cole realized that these simple moments, small gestures, quiet companionship, shared labor, were beginning to heal the deep wounds he had carried for so long. As the days unfolded, Cole and Ahioka grew more comfortable in each other's presence. They shared tasks, shared stories, and even shared moments of quiet reflection. Cole found himself opening up in ways he had never imagined, revealing fears, regrets, and hopes that had been buried for years. Ahioka listened with patience and understanding, her presence offering a mirror to his own resilience and courage. In return, she shared her journey, her struggles, and her determination to survive. Through these exchanges, a bond formed that went beyond words, a connection rooted in trust, respect, and the quiet acknowledgement of shared strength. By the end of the third week, Cole felt a change within himself. The walls he had built around his heart were no longer as strong, and he realized that perhaps life had a way of offering second chances, even to those who had long abandoned hope. He looked at Ahioka, tending to the horses with careful precision, and felt a sense of admiration and gratitude. She had arrived on a dying horse, weary and worn, yet she brought with her a light that began to illuminate the darkness he had embraced for so long. In her presence, he found not just companionship but inspiration, a reminder that courage and resilience could exist even in the harshest conditions. And so, as the sun set over the desert once more, painting the plains in shades of gold and crimson, Cole and Ahioka sat together near the fire. The horses rested nearby, the cabin sheltered them from the cool evening breeze, and for the first time in years, Cole felt a sense of peace. The desert, once a symbol of isolation and pain, had become a place of healing, connection, and possibility. He understood that their journey was only beginning, that challenges and dangers still lay ahead. But for the first time, he believed that together, they could face whatever came their way. In the quiet glow of the firelight, Cole realized that healing was not a solitary endeavor. It was a shared experience, built through trust, patience, and the small acts of kindness that could transform even the loneliest of lives. Ahioka, with her quiet strength and unwavering determination, had become not just a companion but a guide, helping him navigate the desert, the world, and his own heart. And in that realization, Cole found the courage to hope once more, to believe that life, even after loss and hardship, could still offer moments of beauty, connection, and renewal. Life on the plains had settled into a comfortable rhythm, but Cole Matthews knew that peace was often fragile. The desert could be calm one moment and unforgiving the next. For weeks, he and Ahioka had shared quiet days, tending to the horses, repairing fences, and exploring the land together. Their bond had grown stronger with each passing day, built on trust, shared labor, and unspoken understanding. Yet deep in the back of Cole's mind, a persistent worry lingered, a fear that his past, which he had buried so deeply, would eventually catch up to him. He had hoped that his years of isolation had kept the world at a distance, but the truth was unavoidable. Cole had left behind unfinished business in town, old debts, unresolved arguments, and enemies who had not forgotten. For years, he had avoided anyone who might remind him of his failures, believing that solitude could protect him. Now, with Ahioka beside him, he felt a strange mixture of courage and dread. Courage, because he was no longer entirely alone. Dread, because he knew that isolation could not shield him forever. The warning came quietly at first, in the form of dust rising on the distant trail. One afternoon, as Cole and Ahioka guided the horses across a dry creek bed, he noticed movement near the horizon. At first he thought it was a trick of the heat, a mirage caused by the shimmering air above the plains. But then the figures became clearer, two men on horseback, riding with a purposeful urgency that made Cole's stomach tighten. He recognized them immediately. One of them was Jeb Harper, a man Cole had crossed paths with years ago in town. The other was a younger rider, unfamiliar but clearly working with him. Both carried the weight of authority and threat in their posture, and Cole knew in an instant that they had not come for friendship. Ahioka noticed the tension in Cole's body and tilted her head, silent but questioning. Cole took a deep breath and shook his head slightly, trying to convey that they needed to remain calm. Words were unnecessary. She could sense the danger as clearly as he could. Together, they led the horses to a nearby ridge, finding cover among rocks and scrub. From this vantage point, they watched the riders approach, their intentions obvious in the urgency of their movements. Cole's mind raced. He could retreat deeper into the desert, vanish like he had for years, but this time he was no longer alone. Ahioka was with him, and she had no reason to be dragged into his past. He signaled to her to stay low as he descended slowly toward a small arroyo, hoping to intercept the men before they reached the cabin. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of voices. Cole's pulse quickened. The first man spoke, clearly calling out, "Cole Matthews, we know you're out here. You can't hide forever." The voice, harsh and commanding, carried across the plains, and Cole felt a pang of fear mixed with anger. He had spent years hiding, trying to forget the mistakes he had made, and now they had come to find him. Ahioka stayed close, her eyes sharp and alert. She did not speak, but her hand rested lightly on Cole's arm, a silent gesture of solidarity. Cole realized in that moment that he was no longer facing this threat alone. He felt a surge of determination, strengthened by the bond they had formed over the past weeks. He would not let the past define him any longer. Not while Ahioka, with her quiet courage, was at his side. As the men drew closer, Cole began to plan. He knew the terrain better than anyone, having spent years studying every ridge, creek, and hidden pathway. He used that knowledge now, leading the horses along a narrow, winding trail that would give them the advantage. The riders, confident and unaware of the hidden paths, followed, their shouts growing louder as frustration set in. Cole could hear the younger rider muttering complaints, clearly unsure of the older man's plan. The desert, once a silent witness to his solitude, now became an ally, offering cover and concealment as he moved with quiet precision. Ahioka matched his movements, silent and efficient, guiding the horses and keeping them steady. Cole glanced at her, gratitude welling in his chest. She had not been born to this life, yet she adapted quickly, moving with the skill and grace of someone who had survived countless challenges. Together, they navigated the terrain, weaving through rocks, small canyons, and hidden ravines. Cole's heart pounded, but he felt a strange clarity. This was not just survival. This was a test of everything he had learned over the years, and now he had a partner who trusted him completely. The confrontation came sooner than Cole expected. The riders had finally spotted the horses, and Jeb Harper called out again, his voice sharper, tinged with anger. "We know you're here, Matthews. Come out or we'll find you." Cole knew that running would only delay the inevitable. He needed a plan, a way to protect Ahioka and himself without giving in to fear. He led the horses to a narrow canyon where the rocks created natural barriers. The riders followed, but the terrain slowed them, forcing them to dismount and proceed on foot. Cole took a deep breath and stepped into view, positioning himself between the riders and Ahioka. He held his ground, his presence commanding despite the tension in his muscles. "I'm not hiding anymore," he said, his voice steady. "You have a problem with me. Then speak. But you will not harm anyone else." The words surprised even him. He had spent years avoiding confrontation, yet now he spoke with authority, strengthened by the knowledge that he was no longer alone. Jeb Harper scowled, taken aback by Cole's calm defiance. "You think you can just stand there?" he sneered. "You owe us, Matthews. You've got debts to settle." Cole met his gaze, unflinching. "Debts can be settled without violence," he replied. "I'm not running anymore, and I'm not letting anyone else get hurt." The younger rider glanced nervously at his companion, unsure of how to respond. The tension in the air was thick, almost tangible, as if the desert itself held its breath. Ahioka stepped forward, placing herself slightly behind Cole but close enough to be part of the confrontation. She did not speak, but her presence was enough to make the men pause. There was a quiet strength in her stance, a resilience that seemed to echo the harsh, unyielding beauty of the desert itself. Cole realized that she was not just a companion, she was a force, someone who could stand with him in the face of danger and offer support without words. Her courage gave him a confidence he had not felt in years. After a tense moment, Jeb Harper spoke again, his tone slightly less aggressive. "Fine, we'll settle this another way," he muttered. The two men retreated, their anger and frustration evident, but they did not attempt further confrontation. Cole watched them go, heart still pounding, and turned to Ahioka. She smiled faintly, a small, quiet gesture of reassurance. Cole nodded in return, feeling a deep sense of relief, but also a recognition that the desert could always bring challenges, some expected, some not. What mattered now was that they faced them together. In the days that followed, Cole and Ahioka worked to reinforce the cabin and secure the surrounding land. They repaired fences, stocked food and water, and prepared for the possibility that trouble could return. Each task, though simple, carried significance. It was not just about survival. It was about reclaiming a sense of agency, about refusing to let fear dictate their lives. Cole began to understand that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it, and Ahioka's presence reminded him of that lesson with every shared task and quiet observation. Evenings became a time of reflection and quiet celebration. They would sit by the fire, watching the stars emerge one by one, and speak of the day's challenges, small victories, and the lessons learned. Cole sometimes spoke of his past mistakes, not to dwell on them, but to acknowledge them and learn from them. Ahioka listened, offering quiet support and gestures of understanding. Their bond deepened, strengthened not just by shared survival, but by mutual respect, trust, and the recognition that both had endured hardships and emerged stronger for it. One afternoon, as they repaired a section of fence near the creek, Cole paused and looked at Ahioka. "You've taught me more than I can say," he admitted quietly. "Not just about the land, but about trust, patience, and courage." Ahioka nodded, her eyes reflecting the soft light of the afternoon sun. She did not speak, but her smile conveyed understanding and mutual recognition. In that moment, Cole realized that their partnership had grown into something far deeper than simple companionship. It was a bond forged through adversity, strengthened by shared struggle, and tempered by respect. The events of the past weeks had changed Cole in ways he had not expected. He no longer felt the same crushing weight of solitude. The desert, once a symbol of isolation and punishment, had become a place of learning, growth, and connection. And while he knew that challenges would continue to arise, old debts, distant threats, and the unpredictable nature of the plains, he also knew that he would face them with Ahioka at his side. Together they had learned to trust, to act with purpose, and to face danger without hesitation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and deep crimson, Cole and Ahioka stood side by side, watching the sky transform. Dusty and the other horse grazed nearby, peaceful and secure. The cabin, fortified and safe, stood as a testament to their shared labor and resilience. Cole felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, not just for the work they had done, but for the courage he had found within himself and the bond he had formed with Ahioka. The desert, with its vast expanses and harsh beauty, had tested them both. It had brought danger, uncertainty, and reminders of the past, but it had also offered lessons, opportunities, and a chance for renewal. Cole Matthews, once a broken and isolated man, now felt a sense of purpose he had not known in years. With Ahioka by his side, he understood that the past could not be undone, but the future could be shaped through courage, trust, and the willingness to face life together. And so, as night fell and the stars shimmered above, they returned to the cabin, ready to face whatever might come next. The bond they had forged in the quiet days and tense confrontations was now unbreakable, a source of strength that would guide them through the trials ahead. For Cole Matthews, the broken cowboy who had once hidden from the world, the journey toward healing and redemption had entered a new chapter, one defined by courage, companionship, and the understanding the first light of dawn broke across the desert, painting the plains in soft hues of pink and gold. Cole Matthews stepped out of his cabin, stretching his arms, the crisp morning air filling his lungs. For the first time in years, he felt something he had long thought impossible: peace. The events of the past weeks had changed him. He had faced the shadows of his past, confronted threats that had haunted him, and most importantly, learned that life did not have to be endured alone. Ahioka, the Apache woman who had arrived on a dying horse, now stood beside him, her eyes bright with quiet determination, her presence a source of strength and hope. The two of them moved through the morning chores with ease, their routines synchronized in ways that spoke of mutual trust and understanding. Cole fed the horses, carefully checking their hooves for any signs of strain or injury, while Ahioka prepared a small breakfast of dried fruit, bread, and water. Dusty, Cole's loyal horse, nickered softly as he approached, and the other horse, now fully recovered and strong, moved with a lightness that showed it had regained its spirit. Cole smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment. They had survived storms, threats, and the harsh desert conditions together, and now they were stronger for it. After breakfast, Cole and Ahioka mounted their horses, deciding to explore the plains beyond their usual territory. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the rolling hills and rocky outcrops. Cole led the way, pointing out landmarks, hidden water sources, and subtle signs of wildlife. Ahioka followed closely, her movements precise and careful, her eyes scanning the land as if she could read the stories written in the dirt and stone. The silence between them was comfortable, filled not with awkwardness, but with the ease that comes from shared experience and growing companionship. As they rode, Cole found himself thinking about the past, the mistakes he had made, the losses he had endured, and the years he had spent hiding from the world. For so long, he had believed that solitude was safer, that avoiding people would protect him from further pain. But now, riding alongside Ahioka, he realized that avoidance had only left him empty. Life, he understood, was meant to be shared, and courage was not only about facing danger, but about opening oneself to connection, trust, and vulnerability. They stopped at a small rise overlooking a distant valley, where the sun glimmered off a shallow river winding through the plains. Ahioka dismounted and led her horse to a nearby patch of grass, letting it graze while she examined the landscape. Cole followed, resting a hand on Dusty's neck, feeling the warmth of the animal and the reassurance of its steady presence. For a long moment, they simply stood there, taking in the vastness of the land and the quiet majesty of the desert. In that stillness, Cole felt a sense of clarity. The desert had been harsh, unyielding, and lonely, but it had also shaped him, taught him resilience, and now offered a canvas for a new beginning. As the days unfolded, Cole and Ahioka continued to explore, work, and learn from each other. They repaired fences, guided cattle, and discovered hidden springs that had been forgotten by others. Each task, though simple, carried significance. Survival was never guaranteed in the desert, but they had proven that with trust, cooperation, and determination, even the harshest environment could be navigated successfully. Their bond deepened with every shared experience, every quiet moment, and every small act of kindness. Cole began to speak more openly about his past, not out of obligation, but because he trusted Ahioka to listen without judgment. She, in turn, shared more of her journey, the challenges she had faced, and the dreams she still held in her heart. One afternoon, while collecting firewood near a cluster of mesquite trees, Cole noticed Ahioka pausing, her hand resting gently on a tree trunk. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of thoughtfulness and quiet wonder. Cole approached, curious. She pointed to the horizon, where the distant mountains glowed in the afternoon light, and then made a sweeping gesture, as if inviting him to see the world through her eyes. Cole understood. She was reminding him that life was vast, full of possibilities, and that they had only begun to explore its depths. In that moment, he felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for her presence, but for the courage she had inspired within him. The bond between them was no longer fragile. It had been tested by adversity, strengthened by shared struggle, and now shone with quiet resilience. Cole realized that he had grown in ways he could never have imagined. The fear, guilt, and isolation that had once dominated his life had been replaced by hope, trust, and a renewed sense of purpose. Ahioka had arrived in his life when he was broken and lost, and her presence had ignited a transformation he had long thought impossible. Together they had faced storms, danger, and uncertainty, and emerged stronger, united not just by circumstance, but by choice. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the plains, Cole and Ahioka returned to the cabin. They tended to the horses, prepared a simple dinner, and sat by the fire, watching the stars emerge one by one. The desert, once a symbol of isolation and hardship, now felt like a sanctuary, a place of healing, connection, and renewal. Cole reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from the moment Ahioka arrived on that dying horse to the present, where they had forged a bond that could withstand both the harshness of the land and the weight of the past. Evenings were filled with quiet conversation, gestures, and shared stories. Cole told Ahioka about the friend he had lost, the decisions that had driven him into isolation, and the lessons he had learned from his years alone. She listened attentively, offering gestures of understanding and small words of encouragement. In return, Ahioka shared her experiences, the traditions of her people, and the journey that had led her across the desert. Together, they wove their stories into a tapestry of shared experience, each thread reinforcing their connection and offering insight, wisdom, and comfort. One evening, as the fire crackled and the stars shimmered above, Cole felt a sense of peace he had never known. The past, with all its mistakes and regrets, no longer held power over him. He had faced threats, endured hardships, and survived the harshness of the desert, but most importantly, he had learned to trust, to hope, and to embrace the possibility of connection. Ahioka had become more than a companion. She was a guide, a friend, and a reminder that life could still offer moments of joy, understanding, and renewal. In the days that followed, Cole and Ahioka began to consider the future. The cabin, once a place of solitude, had become a home. The land, once a symbol of isolation, had become a source of sustenance and learning. And the bond they shared offered a foundation for something greater, a life built not on fear and regret, but on trust, resilience, and shared purpose. Cole realized that he no longer needed to hide from the world. With Ahioka by his side, he could face the unknown, explore new horizons, and embrace the possibilities that lay ahead. They began to make plans for the journey beyond the plains, considering trips to nearby towns for supplies, visits to distant family, and exploration of new territories. The idea of leaving the cabin, once unthinkable, now felt exciting and full of potential. Cole understood that life was not meant to be static, and that growth often required stepping beyond the familiar. With Ahioka as a partner, he felt ready to face whatever challenges awaited, confident in their ability to navigate the world together. The final days on the plains before their first journey were filled with preparation and reflection. They repaired fences, stocked provisions, and ensured that the horses were strong and healthy. Each task was completed with care, a testament to their resilience, collaboration, and shared determination. Cole found himself looking at Ahioka with admiration, gratitude, and a quiet affection. She had arrived at a time when he was broken and alone, and her presence had transformed his life in ways he could never have anticipated. As the sun set on the evening before their departure, Cole and Ahioka sat by the fire, the desert bathed in warm hues of orange and gold. The horses grazed nearby, Dusty and Ahioka's horse strong and calm. Cole reached over and gently touched Ahioka's hand, a gesture of connection, trust, and shared understanding. She smiled faintly, a smile that carried warmth, reassurance, and a quiet acknowledgement of all they had endured together. In that moment, Cole felt a profound sense of closure, not an ending but the beginning of a new chapter. When the morning came, they mounted their horses and set out across the plains. The wind carried the scent of sage and earth, and the sun illuminated the vast, open landscape before them. Cole glanced at Ahioka, seeing the determination in her eyes, the quiet strength she had shown through every trial. He knew that together, they could face any challenge, explore any horizon, and embrace the possibilities that life offered. The desert, once a place of solitude and hardship, had become a land of renewal, hope, and opportunity. As they rode toward the distant mountains, Cole felt a sense of freedom he had not known in years. He understood that life's journey was unpredictable, filled with challenges, surprises, and moments of quiet beauty. But he also knew that he no longer had to face it alone. Ahioka, who had arrived on a dying horse, had brought with her courage, resilience, and the possibility of a life beyond fear and regret. Together they moved forward, leaving behind the shadows of the past and embracing the promise of a future filled with trust, hope, and the quiet joys of companionship. And so Cole Matthews, the broken cowboy who had once hidden from the world, rode beside Ahioka, the Apache woman who had changed his life. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a landscape of challenges and possibilities, and for the first time, Cole welcomed what lay ahead. He knew that life would continue to test them, that dangers and hardships were never far away, but he also knew that with courage, trust, and companionship, they could face anything. The journey was not over, it had only begun. And as the sun rose higher, illuminating the vast plains, Cole felt a sense of hope, purpose, and quiet joy that would guide him through all the days to come.